It was a cold, quiet night. The streets were empty, and the wind made the trees rustle softly. A stray dog walked alone on the road. His fur was dirty, and you could see his ribs because he hadn't eaten in days. He looked tired, but his eyes were full of hope, as if he was searching for something. Not far away, the Johnson family was about to fall asleep in their warm, cozy home. Claire, the mother, had just read a bedtime story to her 2 kids, Lily and Ben, before tucking them into bed. The house was peaceful, with the fireplace glowing softly in the living room. Everything seemed perfect. But outside, trouble was coming. The dog suddenly stopped walking and sniffed the air. His ears stood up. He smelled something strange, smoke. His instincts told him something bad was happening. Without wasting a second, the dog started running toward the smell, his tired legs moving as fast as they could. When he reached the Johnsons' house, he froze. Smoke was coming from an upstairs window. Inside, the family was unaware that fire was starting to spread. The dog began barking loudly, his voice echoing through the quiet neighborhood. He barked again and again, trying to wake someone up. This stray dog, who had no home and no one to care for him, decided he wouldn't let this family face the same loneliness and danger he had known. But would anyone hear his cries in time? The stray dog's barks grew louder, more urgent, as he struggled against the thickening smoke. His body was covered in soot, his fur clinging to his skin as he darted around the yard. His legs, aching from exhaustion, pushed him forward as he refused to stop. The fire was growing inside the Johnsons' house, creeping its way toward the family. It had started in the kitchen, where a forgotten candle had tipped over, igniting a small pile of paper towels. What started as a flicker quickly spread to the nearby cabinets, setting the entire room ablaze. The fire was growing fast, and smoke was filling the house at an alarming rate. Every step was a battle, but the dog was determined. His heart pounded in his chest as he tried to break through the smoke, forcing himself closer to the house. His eyes watered from the sting of the heat, but he kept barking, unwilling to give up. Meanwhile, Claire was just about to fall asleep when she heard a faint sound, a bark. She groggily turned over, thinking it was just some dog in the distance, but then another bark came, louder this time. She sat up in bed, confused. Why would a dog be barking this late? Claire frowned, sensing something wasn't right. She went to the window and peeked outside. The night was still, but the dog's barking seemed urgent. Claire grabbed her phone to call the animal shelter, thinking the dog might need help. But before she could press call, she noticed the smell. Something was burning. It was faint at first, like burnt wood. But as she stepped closer to the window, the smell grew stronger. Her heart skipped a beat. She turned and rushed toward the stairs, shouting, "Ben, Lily, get up. We need to get out of here, now." Claire pulled Lily and Ben close, coughing from the smoke. "Mom, I'm scared." Ben's voice trembled as he clung to her, his tiny body shaking with fear. "I know, honey. We need to get out right now," Claire whispered, her voice strained. She pushed the children toward the window, desperately trying to find a way out, but the smoke was making it hard to see. She stumbled toward the door, coughing violently as the flames started to lick at the walls. Outside, the dog had reached the side of the house, his paws now bleeding from running over sharp stones and rough patches of grass. He was getting weaker by the second, but the thought of the children kept him going. He wasn't going to let them suffer. His mind flashed back to his own days of being alone on the streets, hungry and abandoned, and he couldn't bear the thought of those kids experiencing the same fate. With a final burst of energy, the dog managed to jump against the side of the house, his sharp bark echoing through the yard. His eyes darted to the smoke-filled window where he could see Claire, now standing on the edge of panic. She looked at him, her heart racing. She saw the wild look in his eyes, saw the desperate hope he held in his heart. The dog wasn't giving up, and neither could she. But just then, a loud crash from inside the house made Claire's heart stop. The fire had reached the stairs. Time was running out. The dog's muscles screamed in pain as he pushed himself forward, jumping against the house once again, barking furiously. He needed to get their attention, to make sure they knew the danger was real. His mind was on nothing but saving them, even if it meant risking everything. Claire finally opened the window, the smoke stinging her eyes as she saw the dog. He was there, just outside the house, still barking, his body trembling with exhaustion. His strength was failing, but his determination never wavered. Claire's heart swelled with gratitude as she realized that this stray dog, who had nothing and no one, was trying to save her family. With every ounce of strength left in her, Claire threw the window open wider, coughing and gasping for air. "Get back, kids!" she screamed, pulling Lily and Ben to the window. She was about to climb out when she heard the fire crackle, growing louder. The heat from the flames was unbearable now. The dog's barking echoed in her mind, urging her on. With the fire growing closer, she had no choice. The time had come. She grabbed Lily and Ben, one under each arm, and jumped out the window into the yard below. The dog watched them land safely, then collapsed to the ground, his body spent from the struggle. He had done it. He had saved them. But just as Claire and her children stood in the yard, looking at the burning house, a terrifying realization hit her. She still hadn't seen the dog, clearly. He had been there, but was he all right? Claire's eyes searched desperately in the smoke-filled yard, her heart racing once more. Where was he? The fire roared behind Claire, growing louder with every passing second. She held her children close, their faces filled with fear as they stared at the flames devouring their home. Claire's heart was pounding, and she could barely breathe in the smoky air. She was shaking, unsure of what to do next. But then, a faint sound cut through the crackling fire, the sound of a dog's weak, strained whimper. Her heart skipped a beat. The stray dog, the hero of the night, had collapsed just moments after they had jumped out the window. His fur was singed, his body covered in cuts and bruises from the struggle, but he had kept going. He had kept fighting. Claire scanned the yard, her eyes desperately searching through the thick smoke. Where was he? Suddenly, she spotted him, a small, trembling figure lying near the bushes. His body was barely moving, and she could see how badly the fire had taken its toll. His fur was singed and blackened, and his legs were twisted beneath him. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, but it was clear he was fading fast. "Please no," Claire whispered, her voice breaking as she ran toward him, her heart aching with every step. Lily and Ben were still frozen in fear, but they followed their mother, instinctively understanding that something was wrong. The dog's eyes fluttered open when he heard Claire's voice. His tired, weary gaze met hers, filled with a mixture of relief and pain. Despite everything he had been through, he still had the strength to look at her, as if telling her he had done what he came to do. His tail, which had been dragging behind him, gave a weak wag as Claire knelt beside him. "Thank you," she whispered through her tears, her hand gently touching his soot-covered fur. The stray dog's eyes closed again, his breathing shallow. The fire still raged in the background, but for a brief moment, the world around them seemed to slow. It was just her and this brave dog, both exhausted, both connected by a bond that words couldn't describe. He had risked everything to save her family. But now Claire knew they didn't have much time. The house was going to collapse soon, and she wasn't sure if she could carry the dog and her children to safety. She glanced back at her kids, who were still in shock, their faces pale, but they were alive. They were safe. And so was the dog for now. The dog gave another faint, weak bark, his body trembling with the effort, as if saying, "I'm not done yet." Claire's heart swelled with a mix of sadness and gratitude. She knew she couldn't leave him behind. She scooped the dog into her arms, despite his weight, his warmth, and his broken body. With Ben holding onto her side and Lily walking beside them, Claire moved quickly, the smoke swirling around them. The fire was closing in, but the dog was still with them, his head resting on her lap, trusting her, just as she trusted him. The sound of sirens grew louder. The fire trucks were close, but Claire had no idea if they could make it in time to save the house. All that mattered now was the dog, the hero who had given everything for her family. But just then, Claire stumbled, nearly falling as the weight of the dog pulled her down. She stopped, gasping for breath, looking at the dog in her arms. His eyes flickered open one last time, and Claire knew. She knew that if she didn't move, if she didn't push forward, he might not make it. "I can't let you go," she whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. With every ounce of strength she had left, Claire pushed herself to her feet and kept walking, determined to save the dog who had saved them all. The sirens were blaring now, and the sound of fire trucks filled the air. Claire stumbled towards the safety of the street, her legs weak from exhaustion, but she refused to stop. The fire was still raging behind her, but the cool night air felt like a promise of safety. The dog, his body trembling in her arms, was alive, but barely. Just as she thought she couldn't go any farther, the firemen arrived. They quickly rushed to her side, guiding her away from the burning house and into the safety of their truck. Claire felt a sense of relief flood through her, but her heart was still focused on the dog. She hadn't realized just how badly he had been hurt until she saw the blood-stained fur and the deep burns along his body. The firemen, seeing her panic, immediately turned their attention to the dog. One of them gently took the dog from her arms, assuring her they would take care of him. The other fireman helped Claire and her children into an ambulance, where they were given blankets and checked for injuries. But Claire couldn't stop looking at the dog, her hero, as they worked to save him. "Don't worry," the firefighter said gently. "We've got him." Claire nodded, feeling a wave of exhaustion and relief. The smoke still hung in the air, but the worst was over. She had her children, and she had the dog, her family's savior. As they made their way to the hospital, Claire whispered to her children, "We're safe because of him." Later that night, as the dog was carefully treated by the vet, Claire sat by his side, holding his paw. She whispered again, "Thank you for saving us." The dog gave a soft, tired wag of his tail, and Claire knew, with all her heart, that this stray dog had found a family that would never let him go. Weeks passed, and the dog, now named Max, had fully healed. Claire and her family welcomed him into their home, where he was treated like royalty. His days of wandering the streets were over. He had a warm bed, a full belly, and most importantly, a family that loved him deeply. Max's once dull eyes now sparkled with joy and trust. The bond between him and Claire's children, Lily and Ben, grew stronger every day. They would spend hours playing in the yard, laughing as Max chased after sticks and wagged his tail in delight. The love they shared was undeniable, and it was clear that Max had found his forever home. As Claire looked at her children, now safe and happy, and at Max resting peacefully by the fireplace, she realized that sometimes the greatest blessings come when you least expect them. If Max's story touched your heart, remember that countless animals like him are waiting for a chance at a better life. Consider adopting a pet today, support your local shelters, and give animals the love and care they deserve. And don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories that will inspire you to make a difference.